Okay, my name is Silvia Wibowo. I work as a cloud solution architect for Microsoft in Azure infrastructure. What does Azure infrastructure means? It means all the servers, storage, network, and basic security surrounding your application. Okay, agenda for today, I don't have much slides, so yeah, maybe if someone needs to ask questions, please go ahead. Business application resiliency. So I'm talking about business application here, about platform. So not your application running on a VM, virtual machine, but more on the higher level. Not really a SaaS, the software as a service, but somewhere in between, like the PaaS part, platform as a service. And how do you manage resiliency for that PaaS layer? Okay, and then, of course, shared responsibility. How much is the responsibility of the service provider? How much of it is your responsibility as a user? And then takeaways. So, yep, business resiliency. So Act 1. Imagine you're an IT director being tasked into creating some business application, and you need to maintain the resiliency. Why? Because any downtime will impact everyone. It will impact you as the IT director, it will impact the user, it will impact the marketing department, sales department, everyone. Okay, imagine that this is your company, the company that you work for, in the news, but not in a good way. There's delay because of downtime, there is something went wrong, and well, it caused disruption. It caused inconvenience for everyone involved. Okay, and the next scenario is an architect deploying a SaaS platform. So whether you use a PaaS or a SaaS, you need to think about the resiliency as well, because not everything is the service provider responsibility. Some is your responsibility as the user or as the architect or as the IT director. Okay, so let's get back to the basic. What is the definition of resiliency? An ability to recover from adversity or change. Just like the vendor earlier, that something breaks down and they need to pivot on the spot to find something else that works. So that is considered resiliency. Even if it's basic, like I have to plug in a USB drive into my computer, and it wants me, do you want to scan the drive? Well, yes, I want to scan it, and then I copy my file into it, but it works. And the ability for a system of a service to function correctly and consistently. So how do we think that our business application, a critical one, that if that application doesn't work, it will impact our business badly? Why? Well, there's a lot of answers for why. Because if it goes down, then nothing works. Revenue is gone. Our customer is gone. If the money is gone, then maybe you get laid off. Or maybe worse, you get sued over something that you didn't configure correctly. It is a partnership between the cloud provider and you as the customer. So not everything is on the cloud provider side, and not everything is at your side. So defining the boundary between those sides also is important for you, Because sometimes you think that, oh, it's the cloud provider responsibility, but sometimes it's not. If you think incorrectly, you think that it's the cloud provider responsibility to provide resiliency on something, and it turns out that it's not that the case, then you will feel the impact. If something goes wrong, then you ask the cloud provider to fix it, but it's not their responsibility. So understanding that boundary between your area and the cloud provider area is also critical to maintain your resiliency. And of course, you need to monitor. You need to know that your system is going down. If you don't know and you wait for the customer to complain, it's already too late. Maybe your monitoring system will tell you before it goes down. There are some signs, like maybe the utilization starts going up, the latency starts going up, before suddenly it just nothing, went completely off. Okay, based on that, that's how you define the capabilities and the shared responsibility. This is very important because all the business applications, the PaaS system share this. But the boundary between the cloud provider and you as the customer sometimes shifts. So there is the design principle. Do you need one or two or three? Or maybe more than that. Data redundancy. How do you maintain your data? Do you need backup? Do you need replication? Do you need to create second copy, third copy, etc.? Fault tolerance. Well, fault tolerance and redundancy sometimes, the line gets blurred between fault tolerance and redundancy. For example, if you have a traffic jam, then you will find some other route to get around the traffic jam. But sometimes you cannot. You just simply stop there. That's one way to think about fault tolerance and resiliency. Because fault tolerance means something breaks down, but you can keep operating. Maybe not in the same capacity, but a reduced capacity, but it's not totally going down. For example, if you have an application that acts asynchronously, for example, you create a request, some other system capture that request, and then some other back-end system will process that request. If your processing power, the back-end, is broken, at least there is something that captures the request. But if you build everything synchronously, so this system rely on the next system to capture and immediately process it, otherwise the whole transaction gets canceled, then any of the components, if it breaks down, then the transaction didn't happen at all. That means that's the design principle. How do you design your transaction? How do you define that process so that if some component breaks down, you can still operate it? And of course, disaster recovery planning. Disaster recovery depends on how mission critical your system is, and it depends on what sort of disaster scenario you want to protect against. It doesn't make sense to spend millions of dollars for some system that only generates you, for example, hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. But you need to spend millions of dollars to keep redundancy for that kind of system. Okay, there are a few scenario that we can look at the perspective of this. There's CISO, there's IT level, there's also head of operation. So from their point of view, there are different components to be able to maintain the resiliency of your platform. So let's take a look at the head of operation. How do you answer this question? Is my business stack running optimally? What do you need to answer that question? Well, you need to have visibility. Running optimally, what's the definition of optimally? And what if you're trying to change something? Will the change break anything? And how do you recover from something failing in your system? So those are the three components that you need to think about for resiliency of your business application. So in overall, there are three different areas that you can focus on to maintain your resiliency: application lifecycle management, observability, and resiliency. Let's dive into the first area, which is operation. There are different components here. One of the most important one is ALM, Application Lifecycle Management. It's very important because if your application is outdated and you need to add features to it, then, well, that's change management in the action. How do you incorporate the change without breaking anything and make sure that the user can get the features that they want? The deployment practice, well, there are a few stages into deployment practices. And the most important thing is to minimize impact of code defects. Every code has defect. Every code has bugs. And the most important thing is use dependency wisely, because the more components you depend on, the more probability that something fails in the way. Okay, and the next part is observability. Monitor, monitor, monitor. Get visibility into every metrics that you can get your hands on. By monitoring, we can answer the question, what are the most common customer problems? Is it hard to detect something impacting your system? And sometimes your application goes into a degraded health without you knowing it. Okay, last but not the least, about resiliency. Decide between risk and cost. Because the lower your risk, the higher your cost. If you want to protect against everything, every single thing in the world, then it will cost you a lot. Think about your business model and how cost makes sense in eliminating certain risk. Okay, that's disaster contained within and the data center. So a data center, different data center, or maybe different region altogether. For example, your cloud provider provides multiple data centers within the region. Different location, or even different island. There is a concept called availability zones. So cloud provider has these availability zones. What does availability zones mean? Maybe some of you have already familiar with that term. Maybe some, especially the students, haven't heard of that term yet. Availability zones means the area where everything is within a failure domain. For example, they have the same power, the same network, the same flood domain, the same cooling system. So if any of those components fail, one availability zone may go down, but another availability zone will not be affected at all. So if you put your system into different availability zone, that will increase your resiliency. How about regional? What if suddenly there's an earthquake in New Zealand and there's power cut, the whole New Zealand goes black? No power at all. Well, we can think of that as a regional disaster because the probability of it happening is really low. But if you do need to take care of that risk, then there is an option to put your system into a different regional, for example, Australia or Singapore or somewhere else. Okay, so for the takeaway in my session, how do you ensure high availability and fault tolerance to your SaaS platform application? If you have the answer to that question, yes, you get 1 point. Second question, what strategies do you have in place for handling transient error and network glitches? And then how do you manage data redundancy and ensure consistency across the platform? And the last question is that you need to ask yourself, what are your business continuity plan to ensure critical applications remain accessible during technical issues? So I'll give you a recipe for success, maintaining your business application resiliency. There are 3 ingredients. If you have 0 ingredients, you plan to fail. If you have 1, then, well, you kind of get there, but not fully there. If you have 2, you're pretty much there, but if you have 3, then yeah, that's your recipe for success. Any questions? Nope. Are you still awake? Okay, cool. So for all stages of implementation, there are the resiliency for initiate phase, implementation phase, prepare phase, and the last is operation phase. With that, thank you for listening to me.